It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in a special crossover edition of podcasts that take things. It is Take Command and Take the North. I'm Craig Hoffman, the host of the Take Command podcast in D.C. with Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune and host of the Take the North podcast up there in the Windy City. Dan, what's up, dude?
Not much. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited for this matchup, even though it might not be as we sit there. Well, I do break the podcast rules here and tell everybody when we're recording. But it is about 3:20 Eastern time on Wednesday, which is relevant because as of now, it looks like the matchup will be Marcus Mariota versus Caleb Williams, not Jaden Daniels versus Caleb Williams. That is, of course, subject to change, but Jaden Daniels missing practice on Wednesday. Mariota taking the traditional Wednesday, I'm talking to the media, as the starting quarterback spot. Dan, how has the vibe changed, if any, in Chicago in terms of the hype around this game, knowing that Daniels might not be under center for the Commanders?
Yeah, on the topic of taking things, I think everyone in Chicago is taking inventory on Jaden Daniels' ribs and trying to figure out whether he will be available on Sunday. It seems increasingly unlikely as we get closer that 1 versus 2 matchup between the top 2 picks in the draft from April will materialize. And I think for the fans, there's probably a level of disappointment in that. I think everybody wants to play that comparison game. I think they want to see with their eyes what it looks like to see Caleb Williams go up against Jaden Daniels and see what kind of show those two young quarterbacks can put on. I think internally in the building at Hall, I think there's a focus and an understanding that these are two teams that are really on the climb right now, pretty unfamiliar territory for both of us. And they understand the opportunity here to get that 5th win of the season, to create that relevance in the playoff picture. And so as much as the Jaden Daniels injury may hinder the matchup, I think there's an excitement for what this game could be for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there feels like a bit in Chicago that there is far more comparison. And maybe this is just social media being the worst, but the comparison game is heavier in Chicago than it is here, which would make sense because Chicago had the choice, right?
Correct.
Like the Bears had the decision to make between Daniels and Williams, and they chose Williams, obviously, and as great as Daniels has been, that who knows, in the long term, that could still be the right call. They could both be the right calls for their particular franchises. We don't know. We're 7 games in, but through 7 games, Daniels has been the better player. There's also no doubt about that. While Commanders fans have done an excellent job of voting for the Rookie of the Week, most of those have been deserved in terms of the awards that Jaden has gotten. So what is kind of the early returns on that decision and how Ryan Poles went through that process where it seemed like Caleb all the way in Chicago, and all of a sudden through 7, Daniels has looked like the better player?
Well, yeah, so there's a couple ways I could take that. The first thing I would say is that through 7 is really like taking a look at the Masters leaderboard at like 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
and it's like there's a lot more tournament to be played here. And so I think this is a conversation that won't really be decided until 7 years down the road, much less 7 weeks that we're here through it now. I think the dynamic that's really interesting here is, as you mentioned, the Bears did have the choice, but also because Jaden Daniels got off to that fast start, social media and the morning TV talk debate shows asked the question, did the Bears make a mistake taking Caleb Williams? I don't think anyone in Chicago believes they did. I think they think it was a no-brainer decision to take Caleb Williams, and that his play the last 3 weeks has certainly justified it. But Jaden Daniels' fast start, I think, created a little bit of a national comparison game that then filtered in to the local market here in Chicago, where you say, well, wait a second, let's let this play out a little bit. But people are still very curious to see what's going on there. And I'd be interested to hear from you at what you attribute the fast start and the very quick acclimation that Jaden Daniels has had too.
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted, and if you're going to do it in the comparison lens, I think you have to point out, like, Jaden's a far more experienced player. If 55 starts in college, he's 23 years old. Caleb had less than that. He started a fair amount of games for a guy that still left as early as he could, but he's 21 years old. It's very, very, very different in terms of the experience level. And then I think the thing that's most fascinating to me, Dan, and like this to me is like a league-wide, they should study this for years to come, is how the two quarterbacks were handled. Caleb was handed the keys to the franchise in every single way. Marketing, he's the number one guy, no competition. You know, we see on Hard Knocks, he's having one-on-ones with the head coach immediately. Like, they just were like, you are our guy, you're the man, do the man stuff. And here, it was like, hey, you're going to compete with Marcus Mariota. they knew that he was going to beat him out.
Right.
Like, that's not fair. Sorry to our podcast audience that's listening to this that has heard me make this comparison, but like if I play one-on-one against LeBron James, technically there's a competition, but we all know who's going to win. And Marcus Mariota is a far better football player than I am basketball player relative to LeBron James, but like technically that's still a competition. Jaden won said competition, but even then they were like, we don't need you to be a leader. We have guys like Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz that we brought in. We have Terry McLaurin and John Allen in-house. Just go play quarterback.
Yeah.
And Cliff Kingsbury is very, very good at making life easy for quarterbacks. That is something he has been consistent at all levels. So you have an offense that fits the skill set on principle. Cliff has done a great job of tailoring that to Jaden. They've done a tremendous job of insulating the offensive line. Even though Cliff is thought of as this air raid guy, they run the absolute mess out of the football. And then Dan Quinn has been the right kind of guy from a management standpoint as a head coach for Jaden. And then you have to just go to Jaden. Like, he's a super competitor. He's very smart. His senior year at LSU, he barely had any classes, so he was able to kind of professionalize his routine, and he had that advantage coming into the league, and he's found a routine that absolutely works for him. And the results then, kind of speak for themselves. It's a lot of process to get there, but it's a good process. This is why I think that it's probably going to last for a long, long time.
It's really interesting to play that comparison game because Dan Quinn is a guy who interviewed for the head coaching job here in Chicago in 2022 before Matt Eberflus was hired. And then Cliff Kingsbury interviewed for the offensive coordinator vacancy that was here when they fired Luke Getsy in January and ultimately settled on Shane Waldron, who's running the offense right now. And so that comparison game here in Chicago should extend beyond just Caleb versus Jaden. There's going to be a look at the head coaches and coordinators this weekend as well, which is worth taking a look into because this all has to marry together. And obviously you've experienced it there in Washington. We've experienced it here in Chicago. The quest to unlock the franchise quarterback has so many different variables and so many different factors at play, and they need to marry together in some sort of harmony. And so there is no, tried and true manual that you pull out and you say, this is the right way to do it. It is kind of case by case, depending on the player, depending on the organizational philosophy. And as you mentioned, they're two very different approaches here, but through the first month and a half of the rookie seasons for Caleb and Jaden, they've worked out to a large extent.
Yeah, I think the thing with Jaden is it's been pretty linear. Like they had a plan, the plans worked. They haven't had to deviate a whole lot. It feels like that's not been the case in Chicago, or is that looking at it at the outside and just saying like, oh, the results have changed, the process might have changed. But it feels like offensively, like they've stripped some things back. They used to have him dropping back a lot more. Now they're maybe insulating him a little bit more with the play action game. They're running the football a little bit more differently, giving him some screen options, which Caleb's quick release, great screen thrower. Like they've got good guys on the edge. So like that is good. Like I think sometimes people want to see when they analyze quarterbacks, can you do all the hard stuff? And it's like, okay, yeah, you can, but like if you can do the easy stuff, they don't give you bonus yards. If it's an 8-yard gain, it's an 8-yard gain. So figure out how to get 8 yards or 10 yards or 20 yards, whatever it is. And I'm curious, like from the outside, it feels like they've peeled back some layers and made things a little easier for Caleb, and that's helped lead to the success. Is that accurate?
Well, I would say more than anything, they found a way to get the running game going. And the running game was very stagnant through the first 3 weeks of the season. Now they faced some pretty good defensive lines right out of the gates and the Titans and the Texans. And they took their lumps and they struggled there. And then they had a really, really bad loss in Indianapolis in week 3, which caused a little bit of, almost a nerve-wracking tension inside Hallis Hall as they crossed the bridge from that game into what ended up being their win over the Rams, where the offensive captains had to go to the coaching staff, Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron among them, and say, look, like we need to find things that work for us. We need to be committed when things are working to sticking with them. And their ability to get the running game going, to get DeAndre Swift to produce, has then opened up some of the things that you just mentioned, the play action game, the screen game. I've been thoroughly impressed, and I was glad to hear you mention it, and how Caleb handles the screen game, because it's not just his ability to get the ball out quick. He's thrown a few. You can go into each game of the last 4 weeks and find a screen pass that's delivered from a little bit of an unorthodox arm angle where you go, man, like I've seen so many quarterbacks miss that. And now here's DeAndre Swift free for 27 yards. Here's Cole Kmet free for 22 yards. And you go, man, that's really cool to have that unlocked. And so now you pair that with a stretch here where they've played some really bad defenses, the Panthers and Jaguars among them the last 2 weeks. And the Bears can only play who's in front of them, but I think it's been very significant in building their confidence, getting their rhythm going, and getting that flow going. And so hopefully that's something that they can carry forward into this weekend's trip to Washington.
I don't know that people fully understand how important what you just said is with the off-platform and the ability to like deliver it quickly. And we've seen it with Jaden here because he has one of the quickest releases in the league. screens so often, if you go back and watch all 22, they either hit or miss by that much. There is always a guy in the hole who's swiping at the shoelaces, and either he makes contact or he doesn't. And that's the difference in that being an 80-yard touchdown or a -1. And so if you have a quarterback who either can quickly make the decision, get the ball out, get the ball to the guy a la Jaden, or who doesn't even have to set his feet and can just sidearm it out there like Caleb, like that is a huge way to add potential explosive plays to your offense. And I think it's been really cool to see that on the Chicago side. But as you said, it mirrors a very similar discussion we've had here. You don't only play who's in front of you. And the Commanders have absolutely dismantled some really bad teams. They played Baltimore really, really tough. You know, there's a couple teams in there that like have actually played some good ball otherwise. Like Arizona, outside of playing Washington, seems to know how to win football games. They got crushed by the Commanders at home, by the way, with the Commanders coming off a Monday night game, flying across the country. So for Chicago, how confident are you that they figured out some things offensively versus they've played the Jags and the Panthers, and those teams are tremendously bad NFL football teams in 2024?
Tremendously bad. At the same time, the Bears have scored 10 touchdowns offensively the last 2 weeks. That hasn't happened in Chicago, where they've had back-to-back 5 touchdown performances by the offense in the Super Bowl era. The last time it occurred was in 1956, if that gives you any indication about how offensively challenged the Bears franchise has been forever. The competition level is certainly a thing. I think that the Commanders' defense is a step up in class for the Bears, although it's probably just a step into the middle tier or the top of the bottom tier, so to speak.
Right.
You can speak more to that, what they've got going on health-wise and what they can do defensively. But the Bears also have to go on the road, and they're 0-2 in true road games, not counting the London game, which was a quote-unquote home game for the Bears. They haven't won on the road, and so Caleb's going to have to master that challenge as well, being able to operate in that noisy environment, being able to handle that and to bounce back through things. I will say the one thing that thoroughly impressed me from the game in London against the Jaguars is he threw a terrible interception in the second quarter. It was an easy touchdown to DJ Moore. It was underthrown. It was late. It didn't have the juice on it, and it was an interception. And you go, man, how's a rookie quarterback going to react to that? The next 4 times the Bears had the football, touchdown, 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 touchdown. And so that's a little bit of a testament to that sort of resilience Caleb has and that competitive edge where he can fuel mistakes into future success.
So the thing that, as much as we want to talk about these offenses, the thing that's probably key to these games is the defenses, and especially the Bears defense, because they're really good. I know the stat, is it 12 of 13, 13 of 14 at this point, something like that, of holding teams under 21 points? It's a lot going back to
12 straight games of 21 or less. And so, you've got a group that's been stingy and taking the ball away during that stretch, too.
So what is it that makes them good on that side of the ball? Is it how they disguise things, schematics? Is it personnel? Like, what's the engine behind that?
Yeah, well, I do think it is the takeaways that kind of fuel it. And Matt Eberflus has this hits principle that's very well documented here in Chicago, maybe a little bit new to people on the outside, where the T stands for takeaways. It's one of his core things. And so when they emphasize it, it's easy to say, harder to get done. But I think they've got 13 through the first 6 games and have really gotten that faucet open. The other thing I'd tell you is they've got playmakers on all 3 levels. You're very familiar with Montez Sweat and what he brings to a defensive front. Your linebacking core with Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards is filled with veteran experience and guys who have been in big moments. And then the secondary, which admittedly is very banged up at this present moment, is just loaded with guys who play their positions the right way and who play off one another very well. Jalen Johnson trying to establish himself as, if not the best cornerback in the NFL, one of the top 3. And so that's a guy that has really, really stepped his game up, even after being rewarded with a very healthy contract extension this offseason. He's come back almost more motivated and more driven to prove that he was worth it. Yeah,
that's to me where the Marcus to Jaden drop off, the Jaden to Marcus drop off is definitely real. And you could even see it against Carolina. There's some times where Marcus gets away with some stuff because the Panthers had negative pass rush. And you're like, yeah, when you feel like you're at Oregon again, like you play like you're at Oregon again, that's cool. What happens next week? And so guys like Montez obviously are good pass rushers. They're different caliber than anyone Carolina had. But the other thing is Marcus has had turnover issues at times in his career, and Jaden is extremely fastidious, to use my co-host Logan Paulson's one of his favorite words, extremely fastidious with the football. Barely any turnovers. I think he's thrown 2 picks on the year, no fumbles. Like he locks it down. And that could be the ultimate. I mean, turnovers being the key to the game is almost a joke in NFL analysis because it's so obvious, but with the Marcus to Jaden switch, that would be one area where I am extremely concerned if I am Cliff Kingsbury and trying to figure out ways to minimize risk exposure against this Bears defense.
Well, and you also have a running back there that I know has turned heads here in this building. As they've watched Brian Robinson Jr. here this week, they've said, man, like this is a running game that is to be respected. And Brian Robinson Jr. obviously has a skill set that challenges you. And so what do you see from that lens in terms of his ability to be a major player in this particular matchup if indeed the quarterback is not able to play?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. And so the first thing with their running game is extremely well designed. They have done a great job. One, Cliff was pretty good at it in Arizona. Like Cliff's last year, I think it was in Arizona, James Conner had like 1,300 yards. Okay. He's always been a guy who is good with the run game. And specifically, it's interesting now. I've heard some national folks talk about this, and I thought it was a really astute point. How because Cliff comes from the air raid system in college, where at Texas Tech, he's got 4 wide receivers on the field at all times. They're 165 pounds. Those dudes aren't blocking for anything. So how do I run the football with that personnel on the field? Well, sometimes we just have those guys get out of the way. Sometimes we create specific angles where I'm going to need you and your 165 pounds to run as hard as you can into that linebacker and crack him. And if you get in the way, you've done your job. And now he's taken some of those principles, some of that problem solving that he had to do in college, and he's got pro personnel, and he's doing it with, like, hey, let's take our third tight end, rookie Ben Sinnott out of Kansas State, who's an unbelievable blocker. Let's stick him in the slot, run that same thing, and now our pin-pull play is, like, hellish to deal with. So there's some design stuff. Also, Anthony Lynn is the run game coordinator who obviously rose to head coach with the Chargers, so he's an excellent coach. Bobby Johnson has a background with Brian Dable in Buffalo and New York, where some of the quarterback run stuff they did with Josh Allen and Daniel Jones, they've melded that in. Brian Johnson with what he did with Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia. So they have all these brains that can either go one of two ways. You can have what happened to the Carolina staff last year, where they had a bunch of really great names and Frank Reich can't put it all together, and you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. And Bryce Young is on pace to be one of the worst 1-1 overall busts in the history of the sport. Or they can come together in a cohesive way, and you have what you have in Washington. So it's really well designed. Second part is because of the quarterback run factor, which absolutely does not dissipate with Mariota. He may be not as explosive in the open field as Daniels, but Marcus will kill you with his legs if you let him, and he's very, very smart and good at making the correct decisions in the zone read game. Like, he will read it correctly at an extraordinarily high clip. And the RPO stuff behind it. So between the quarterback being able to keep and the potential for RPO, run pass option, passes that can exploit certain run fits, there's just a lot to deal with as a defense. And so it's hard to ever be right in terms of your numbers and have the number of bodies you need. You need someone to make a play, which puts a ton of pressure on the defense. And they've run like these GT guard tackle power pull plays. They've run inside zone. They've run outside zone. They've run gap scheme stuff. They've run straight ahead duo play. Like any kind of run, it's in. And they sequence them really well too, where we got you flowing this way on zone stuff, and then bam, here comes a trap or a wham back the other way. So it's just, if that sounds like a lot, that's kind of the point, I would say, for the audience to take away is like, it's because they can do everything, and because on every play, every blade of grass is threatened, it's just really hard to be right as a defense. And then, to kind of more directly answer your question, Brian Robinson runs harder than hell. And so here's this 6'2", 235-pound guy who runs a 4.5 coming full steam ahead at your bad numbers. And, that part is kind of simple in terms. He's got great vision. He's really powerful, all the good running back stuff. And that is within an unbelievably efficient system.
I don't want to say the Bears have struggled defending the run because they're still a top 10 run defense, but they were number 1 in the NFL a year ago, and they've had some trouble this year limiting the explosive runs. Jonathan Taylor got loose. Tony Pollard got loose. Kyron Williams got loose a couple times. And so there is still that little bit of trepidation that they're going to allow one or two big ones to crack, and then all of a sudden you've had yourself a day that you didn't want to have. And so that will be a challenge for this group to, as you said, defend every blade of grass against this offense. And
on that front, Austin Eckler has been the big play guy. Like, B-Rob will just take a regular like GT pull 20 yards because it's blocked up well and he's hard to tackle and he's got good speed enough to run away from linebackers, and a safety will get him, knock him out of bounds. Eckler's the guy who's gone 50. And he has looked like he did, early career Chargers, super explosive. And they also do a great job of getting like kind of game plan runs. They'll figure out what Chicago wants to do, and they'll use that against them and sneak Austin Eckler somewhere, and he'll have a big play. Like, he's been the guy for that. And I think the other thing, too, that I'd be curious, Dan, not to move totally off the Chicago defense and anything we want to talk about with Washington's defense we can, is Commanders' special teams has been outstanding this year as well. So, like, that's just another thing I want to kind of note. Eckler's been awesome in the return game. They are hitting the mess out of people. Like, they put all 5 safeties on the roster on the field on kickoff return, and they race to the ball to see who can hit the returner as hard as they can. They've knocked a couple out this year. So just, put that in your back pocket as well for special teams that we should pay attention to on Sunday as well.
We've got special teams coordinator Richard Hightower speaking with us on Thursday, so that's
nice.
Good to note some things that Richard had some background in Washington once upon a time, and be interesting to ask him about that. The Bears have their own sort of special teams concerns this week, I would say. Scott Daly, their long snapper who came in at the start of the season to replace Patrick Scales, who had back surgery, hurt his knee in London. I'm sure you've seen tight end Cole Kmet had to be their emergency long snapper in that game and ended up winning NFC Special Teams Player of the Week, which is a bit of a gimmick.
As one does.
And Cole will take it. But Scott Daly is back at practice. You kind of got to monitor it. They do have a backup long snapper on their practice squad if things don't go well leading up to the game, where you can kind of promote that. The other part of this is the Bears' injuries in their secondary right now, which Quan Brisker still in concussion protocol, Tyreek Stevenson coming back off a calf injury, and Kyler Gordon dealing with a hamstring issue, then thrusts some of your core special teams guys into heightened roles on defense, and so there's a handful of guys, Elijah Hicks, Jalen Jones, Josh Blackwell among them, that may have to juggle 2 things, and then you've got to play around in your special teams chess match and figuring out, okay, how much can we use them, if at all, on special teams if they're needed on defense. That's another little X factor against, as you say, a pretty good special teams unit from the Commanders.
So what's your ultimate key to the game? Because for me, this is a take command special. Logan and I spend an undue amount of time talking about game flow and just like, can you keep the game where you want it? If Chicago can somehow jump out early to a lead and Marcus has to drop back, assuming that he's playing, like that's bad news for the Commanders. I think if the Commanders can keep this in a positive game flow where the game is close, they can continue to run the football, that kind of stuff. Like, I think they can compete with the Bears team that I think is very good. I think I'd definitely pick Washington if Jaden was playing. With Marcus, it becomes a little hairier. I'll be a homer and take Washington just to represent my side of the screen here. But I do think that there is a distinct way in which this game becomes really difficult for Washington if Chicago can jump out early. For you, what's that kind of key thing that you think is a matchup or a way the game could be played, something that will determine the outcome more than anything else?
I'll give you a couple numbers that fit into what you're leaning toward right now. Number one, the Bears heading into Monday were 30th in the NFL in first quarter points scored. They have only scored 1 touchdown in the first quarter, 10 total points. Only the Eagles and Rams were worse. I was stunned to see that the Eagles have yet to score in the first quarter. That's like mind-blowing and this deep into a season. So you want that fast start that you're talking about. They haven't gotten off to a fast start this year. It's usually been middle of the second quarter on when they found their flow. And so that's something that they're going to have to do. Matt Eberflus's teams in his 3 seasons here, 3-16 on the road. So it's another concern. They haven't been able to consistently win on the road, and they've lost a few games where they've had commanding leads and blown them. And so you want to see this team with heightened talent and a greater belief about itself go in and handle its business in these games. This is one of those games where many a year past I would have said, no way I'm picking the Bears, because you just can't trust them. There's something about this team I really trust. There's a leadership in the locker room that keeps things steady in game and in weeks when there is adversity that hits, and they just seem to have a belief that they're climbing the staircase. And so I don't have to file my official pick until late Thursday evening for the newspaper and the podcast. Right now I'm leaning towards picking the Bears, because I just think there's something about this group right now that believes that they deserve to win this game and they're going to go handle their business.
And that's the thing. That is a mirror statement here in D.C. There's a professionalism, and obviously, with all the ownership changes and everything here, it's been such a dramatic change in the organization itself. But there's a professionalism about this group that is really fun to watch and really fun to cover. And it should be a good one on Sunday. I presume you'll be making the trip, Dan, to get to see you in the press box.
Saturday night flight. I'll be out there, and I kind of like the 3 o'clock, or I guess 4 o'clock start out there. Allows you to ease into your Sunday a little bit, and then I'll be in that press box. I guess it's Northwest Stadium now. That's what we're calling it.
Northwest Stadium. I like the Fed as a nickname.
Okay.
Northwest Federal Credit Union, because
I can't
there's
get
nothing
used to writing Northwest Stadium. It doesn't sound like a professional sports stadium.
No, there's nothing north or west about it either. It's very silly outside of the fact that it's named for a credit union with whatever that version of cardinal direction is, northwest. That's not what that Cardinals northwest. Anyway, nobody cares. Dan Wiederer, everybody, or Craig Hoffman, everybody, depending on which feed you're listening on, guesting on the podcasts where we take things. Take the North, take command. Appreciate everybody listening. Subscribe wherever you are listening right now. And of course, if you want even more coverage of the opposing side of this matchup, go check out the other episodes that we did this week. For Dan, I'm Craig. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody, here to Take the North and Take Command.
Take care.
Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.